The wind swept through the empty hills of western Colorado, carrying grit across the sage and stone. In 1872, this part of the frontier was nothing but open country and rumor, a place where any man with a pick, a claim, and a touch of luck could imagine himself rich by sundown. That was the spell the two men rode in with, a quiet San Francisco prospector named Philip Arnold and his cousin John Slack. They arrived with dust on their boots, a canvas bag under Arnold's arm, and a story so perfect that it would soon pull the most powerful men in America into the biggest swindle the West had ever seen. When they reached San Francisco, Arnold walked into the office of George Roberts, a banker tied to William Ralston's Bank of California. He laid the canvas bag on the desk and spilled its contents into the light: rough diamonds, rubies, emeralds, sapphires. The stones caught the lamplight in a way that made the room hold its breath. Roberts blinked, then leaned in. He picked up a crystal between his fingers and asked where it came from. Arnold smiled and said only that he and Slack had discovered a secret field somewhere between Wyoming and New Mexico, a patch of ground so rich that gems could be scooped from the soil by the handful. But he added they needed financing and protection. The frontier was crawling with claim jumpers, he said. A secret like this could get a man killed. Roberts examined the stones, then sent them to a local jeweler for appraisal. The verdict came back quickly: genuine, high-quality gems, uncut but valuable. That was all the confirmation San Francisco's financiers needed. Word reached William Ralston himself, the most ambitious banker on the Pacific coast, a man who had funded railroads and silver mines. He summoned Arnold to the bank, treated him like an equal, and pressed for details. Arnold said little. He'd discovered the field accidentally while surveying for gold, he claimed. Now he wanted to sell partial rights for capital. Ralston brought in a small circle of powerful investors: General George S. Dodge, General Henry Halleck, even Charles Tiffany of New York. Each saw a new El Dorado glittering under the western sun. But first, they wanted proof in the dirt. Arnold, playing his part, demanded secrecy. He said they'd have to blindfold themselves on the trip to the site, or risk being followed. He agreed to guide a handful of men from the investment group, each sworn to silence, into the wilderness. In June 1872, the expedition left by train and then on horseback, heading east through the Rockies and into the high desert. Every mile seemed to confirm the legend. When they finally stopped, Arnold and Slack scattered a few spades of earth and told them to dig. Within minutes, men were shouting. Diamonds glittered in the sunlight. Rubies turned up among the pebbles. By dusk, the ground seemed alive with color. They filled bags, hearts racing, convinced they'd found the richest strike in American history. The party returned to San Francisco trembling with greed. Charles Tiffany examined the haul and declared the stones authentic. His valuation placed the field's potential in the tens of millions. No one asked how so many different kinds of gems appeared together in one deposit. Greed had drowned curiosity. The syndicate paid Arnold and Slack $600,000, a fortune in its day, and began buying up surrounding land. Newspapers caught the scent of a new Diamond Mountain. Investors whispered that America's mineral frontier had only begun to speak. Arnold and Slack, meanwhile, vanished. They retreated east, bought land in Kentucky, and suddenly lived like men who had struck oil. Their neighbors saw fine horses, new suits, and a vault in the cellar. When asked, Arnold said only that he'd done well out west. For a time, it looked as if the hoax might stand forever, until a geologist named Clarence King came into the picture. King was no fool. He led the U.S. Geological Survey of the 40th parallel, one of the government's best scientific minds, known for his sharp eye and sharper skepticism. When he heard whispers about a diamond field in the Rocky Mountains, he knew something was wrong. The terrain described didn't match known geology. diamond-bearing rock, kimberlite, had never been found in that part of North America. So he gathered a small team, packed tools and maps, and set out to find the so-called miracle ground for himself. King tracked the investors' trail into the remote stretches of what is now northwest Colorado, near the Wyoming line. What he found stunned him, not for its riches, but for its obvious deceit. Gems were scattered across the soil, yes, but in unnatural ways. He found stones perched on bare rock surfaces, mixed with others that showed weathering from distant lands. There were diamonds beside rubies and sapphires, minerals that never occurred together in nature. It was a salted field, planted to deceive. He gathered samples, compared them, and proved that the site had been deliberately seeded. Later examination revealed where the stones had come from, the same diamond dealers in London who had sold to the two prospectors months earlier. Arnold and Slack had traveled to Europe, bought low-grade uncut gems by the bag, and mixed them with river gravel from Arkansas. When they discovered the field before the bankers, they simply buried the gems where their marks would dig. King raced back to San Francisco. On November 25, 1872, the truth exploded in the newspapers. The Great Diamond Hoax became headline news coast to coast. Bankers who had strutted as pioneers of industry now looked like fools. Tiffany's reputation suffered. Even his trained eyes had been fooled. William Ralston, humiliated, faced ruin. Millions had been wagered on a fantasy, and only 2 men had walked away rich. Arnold was found in Kentucky, where he had already invested his earnings in real estate and bank stock. Authorities tried to prosecute, but because the investors had paid voluntarily and no formal claim had been filed, there was little ground for a criminal case. Arnold returned part of the money in a civil settlement and lived comfortably until his death from pneumonia a few years later. Slack faded into obscurity. Rumor had him working as a day laborer, drunk and broke, muttering about diamonds that never were. For Clarence King, the hoax became both triumph and burden. He had saved the nation's reputation for science, but watched friends among the investors suffer. He later said the affair was an education bought at a price too high for the lesson. The Bank of California tightened its purse strings. Businessmen who had believed they could smell fraud from a mile away now looked twice at every prospector who crossed their path. The Great Diamond Hoax stands as the perfect Western con, a story so audacious it could only work where dreams were larger than reason. It had all the right ingredients: mystery, greed, isolation, and the promise of easy fortune. The victims were not naive farmers or drifters, but the elite of a booming young nation. In the end, the only thing more astonishing than Arnold's trick was how completely people wanted to believe it. Today, the site where the diamonds were found is just another stretch of empty country. Wind through grass, a dry creek bed, the faint trace of old campfire ash. Nothing marks the place where America's greatest gem field never existed, and where 2 men with a sack of stones convinced the mighty that the earth itself had turned to treasure beneath their feet. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.